Sagittarius. They awaken God's wrath. No peace until you're removed. There comes a moment in every soul's journey, Sagittarius, when the stillness becomes louder than the storm. You've always been the wanderer, the fierce truth seeker, the spirit who refuses to be tamed. And yet, even you have known the weight of silence. Not because you lacked the words, but because you believed that endurance was the higher path. You believed that if you were kind enough, patient enough, quiet enough, maybe the storm would pass. Maybe they would finally see your heart. But the universe has been watching. This isn't just a message. It's a sacred confirmation. Not a punishment. Purification. Everything that clung to you, not out of love but control, is now being stripped away. You are not being removed, Sagittarius. You are being returned to the place where your soul can finally rise without apology, to the fire within you that can no longer be suppressed. Archangelic energy moves not with drama, but with precision. And what is unfolding now is nothing short of divine justice. Not the kind that demands revenge, but the kind that clears space for truth. Your truth. So if your chest has felt tight, if your dreams have felt strange, if the people around you are shifting in ways you can't explain, know this. It's not you unraveling. It's everything that no longer deserves you falling away. If this message touches something sacred in you, if you feel seen, stirred, or softened, I invite you to like, share, and subscribe. Not for me, but as a way to say to the universe, I hear you. I am ready. I remember who I am. Gate 1. When the patience of heaven reaches its edge. Sagittarius, you are known for your expansive spirit, for your unshakable optimism, for your wild hope even in the darkest hour. But what the world often forgets is how much you've endured quietly, how often you've swallowed your pain just to keep the peace, how many nights you've laid awake, holding space for people who never once thought to hold space for you. They thought you would always forgive, that your fire would always burn for them, no matter how many times they stood in the rain and blamed you for the cold. They mistook your patience for passivity, your grace for consent. But what they didn't understand, what they never expected, is that Sagittarius is ruled by divine justice. And when that justice rises, it doesn't shout, purifies. You've said it's okay when it wasn't. You've apologized not because you were wrong, but because you didn't want to lose someone who couldn't even see how much you were losing yourself. You've bent over backward to preserve relationships that chipped away at your spirit. And each time you stayed quiet, you hoped, maybe this will be the last time I have to shrink to keep the peace. But peace built on suppression isn't peace. It's spiritual erosion. And heaven knows that. There's a sacred law, one that requires no witness, no courtroom, no spoken plea. When a soul endures too long in silence, the universe rises. Not in vengeance, but in correction. Sagittarius, this is that moment. I once spoke to a Sagittarius woman in her 60s, radiant, soft-spoken, almost invisible in a room until you looked into her eyes. I always thought if I just stayed kind, she said, they'd stop hurting me. But they didn't. Not until one day she stopped answering calls, stopped explaining, stopped apologizing. I realized, she told me, my kindness was being mistaken for weakness, but it was sacred. And I'm done letting them walk on sacred ground with muddy feet. You too are sacred ground. So when everything starts to shift, when people disappear, when familiar spaces feel foreign, when invitations stop coming, when the silence thickens, don't panic. Don't chase. Don't explain. What's happening now is not rejection. It is divine rearrangement. God's patience, like yours, has limits. And not because it's cruel, but because you've endured enough. In the Holy Bible, it is written, my patience is not approval. It is the final chance for change. In Buddhist teaching, there is a powerful reminder. There is no greater merit than releasing what is destroying you. These truths are meeting in your life now, not as theory but as reality. Those who have hurt you without accountability. Those who demanded forgiveness without transformation. Those who took and assumed you'd never leave. This is not their moment anymore. This is yours. You are not losing anything that was meant for your highest good. You are shedding what was never yours to carry in the first place. And if your heart aches in this process, if you feel tender or confused, that's okay. Healing doesn't arrive as a trumpet blast. It arrives as breath, as clarity, as the slow dissolving of what once dimmed your fire. So close your eyes for just a moment and ask yourself, How many times have I stayed silent just so someone else wouldn't feel guilty? How many times have I burned quietly while they basked in the light I was giving away for free? If the answer is too many, then let this be your vow. I no longer remain where my silence is mistaken for surrender. I no longer protect what breaks me just to keep the peace. I am fire. I am sovereign. I am done. And Sagittarius, if you've whispered these words in your heart, then the gates are already opening. What's ahead is not punishment. It is protection. What's leaving is not a loss. It is liberation. In Gate 2, we'll step into what's truly being removed from your life. Not you, but the energies that no longer deserve to remain. The silent miracle of subtraction. Gate 2. You are not the one being removed. What no longer deserves you is. Sagittarius, there is a moment rare, profound, when you realize the relief didn't come from someone arriving, but from someone finally leaving. The silence after they're gone doesn't feel empty, feels holy, and you wonder how long you've mistaken exhaustion for devotion, how long you've been holding your breath, waiting for the pain to soften on its own. You are not being cast out. You are not being left behind. What's falling away now is not a loss. It's grace, because what's leaving isn't your fault. It isn't love. It's the weight you were never meant to carry. For years you told yourself, I just need to be more understanding. If I forgive again, maybe this time they'll stay. You chipped pieces off your spirit like loose bark from an old tree, just to prove that you were still willing to hold the connection together. You begged the universe to let them stay, but it wasn't them who were meant to last. It was you. I once sat with a Sagittarius man, soft-spoken, deeply spiritual, who told me, I used to think every argument was a test of how much love I could give. So I stayed through silence, through distance, through betrayal. I thought, if I just love them enough, maybe they'll finally love me back. But they didn't. And one morning he woke up and realized something terrifying and beautiful. He had been loving alone. That's when the universe intervened. A single text that never came. A goodbye that was never spoken. A slow, silent erosion of presence. And in the empty space that followed, he finally heard something else. His own breath unshaken. His own truth uninterrupted. Sagittarius, this is not punishment. This is a sacred subtraction. The removal of what your soul could no longer carry without breaking. What feels like rejection is actually redirection. What feels like being left is in truth a divine rescue. In Buddhist teaching, there is a phrase, when the bond ends, karma dissolves. Not because you failed, but because the purpose has been fulfilled. In the Bible, it is written, the branches that bear no fruit will be cut away, not in anger, but so that the tree may live. You weren't abandoned. You were being kept alive. Maybe you're still aching. Maybe part of you still wonders, what could I have done differently? But Sagittarius, the answer isn't in what you should have done. The answer is in what no longer needed to stay. Do you feel it? That corner of your life that used to feel heavy now feels still. That stretch of time you once gave away so freely now feels yours again. You're waking up not to silence but to peace. You're falling asleep not with longing but with relief. This is healing. It may arrive quietly, but it is real. And I know the grief still comes. Some nights you may still miss them. But the ache isn't for them. It's for the version of you who waited for too long. The version who thought endurance was love. Who thought breaking was proof of loyalty. But no more. You're not meant to suffer in order to be seen. You're not meant to stay small so someone else can feel big. You're not meant to question your own light, just because someone else couldn't recognize it. So take a deep breath now, not just into your lungs but into your life. Place your hand over your chest and feel that steady rhythm. It's not beating for survival anymore. It's beating for freedom. And if that freedom feels unfamiliar, good. You've been a prisoner of patience for too long. Write it down if your soul agrees. I no longer mourn the things God removed from my path. I honor their leaving as the beginning of my return. Because Sagittarius, you were never meant to beg to be kept. You were meant to be free. And in Gate 3 we'll explore what this freedom really means, why you were never cast out, only summoned. Why the light you've carried quietly for so long is now finally ready to be seen. Gate 3, you were never cast out. You were summoned. Sagittarius, your soul has always known what your heart has been too gentle to say aloud. You were never pushed away. Never rejected. Never forgotten. You were being called forward. There's a difference, one so subtle it often takes heartbreak to recognize. The truth is, you were never meant to stay in places where your light dimmed just to keep the room comfortable for others. You were never meant to be silent so others wouldn't feel convicted by your truth. You, Sagittarius, were born to disrupt shadows with light, not to become one with them. Do you remember the moment you thought you were being left behind? Maybe it was a relationship that dissolved without closure, a job that ended abruptly, a friend who stopped showing up. First it felt like loss. You grieved. You questioned. You asked, why am I always the one left? But then came the space. And then the stillness. And then without warning came something else. A whisper not from outside but from within. You were not abandoned. You were chosen. There is a sacred kind of loneliness that only the called understand. A space that opens when your vibration rises and the old can no longer cling to you. And it hurts. Because you wanted so badly to carry them with you. You wanted the love to grow with you. You prayed not for more but for together. But some souls are not ready. Some love is not strong enough. Some paths split, not because you've done something wrong, but because your soul has finally started to outgrow the container it was poured into. A Sagittarius woman once told me, the moment I lost everything was also the moment I gained something I didn't even know I had, myself. Not the version who begged, not the version who pleaded, but the one who stood still and realized, I don't need to be chosen by anyone, because the divine already chose me. In Buddhist tradition there is a powerful truth. When the mind rests in the heart, the entire world shifts to support it. And in spiritual astrology, Sagittarius represents not just wisdom, but the seeker who becomes the source. You no longer chase the light, Sagittarius. You are the light. So when things fall apart, it's not chaos. It's a divine recalibration. You were never pushed aside. You were lifted out of rooms too small for your voice, out of stories that demanded your silence, out of dynamics that fed on your empathy while starving your spirit. And yes, it's painful to let go of what you wanted to save. But even more painful is staying where your soul withers. You are not being asked to fight for a place. You're being invited to take your rightful one. This is your calling, not to return and plead, but to rise and walk. Not to wait for permission, but to claim what has always been yours. The right to live in peace, in joy, in spiritual fire. Right now, something vast is moving toward you. Not a storm, but a summons. A quiet certainty that the things meant for you are already on their way. Not because you proved yourself worthy, but because you finally stopped begging for scraps and made room for wholeness. If your chest tightens reading this, it's not fear. It's recognition. You're hearing your name whispered back to you after lifetimes of forgetting it. So write this, not for anyone else, but as a vow to your soul. I was never cast out. I was called. And I no longer need anyone's permission to answer. Because Sagittarius, this is what it means to come home to yourself. Not as the one left out, but as the one stepping through the sacred threshold. And in Gate 4 we will enter that home fully. A place not just of survival but restoration. A space where divine justice requires no witness, because it is already happening all around you. Gate 4. Divine justice needs no witness. Sagittarius, there are wounds no one ever saw, moments you sat in silence, not because you had nothing to say, but because you knew no one would understand. How many times have you swallowed your truth just to keep someone else from feeling uncomfortable? How often have you dimmed your fire so they wouldn't feel too cold in their own shadow? You were not weak. You were wise. You were not naive. You were sacred. And even if no one else was there to witness it, heaven was. You see, justice, real justice, does not always arrive in the form of thunder or vindication. Sometimes it comes quietly, like the first breath after grief, like peace returning to a place inside you that has been clenched for years. In this sacred gate, Sagittarius, you are not asked to testify. You are not asked to recount what was done to you or how long you endured. That story is already known. In your bones, in the wind, in the silent records of the universe. There is a Dhammapada verse that says, "A good heart planted never goes to waste. It waits only for the season to bloom." And dear Sagittarius, the season has come. You once thought you needed others to validate your pain, to see the unfairness, to admit what they did, to say they were sorry. But true justice doesn't require an audience. It happens when the soul reclaims itself. When the balance of the cosmos begins to shift quietly, irreversibly, in your favor. You may notice lately that certain people are falling away, that your tolerance for old games has vanished, that relationships you once clung to now feel foreign. It's not you becoming distant, it's your frequency rising. And those who once fed off your light without reverence, they are being removed not because of revenge but because of resonance. Their energy no longer matches yours. Their absence is not your punishment, it's your purification. I once met a Sagittarius who spent years being the anchor in her family, the peacekeeper, the one who made everyone else feel safe while she slowly disappeared. Then one day she stopped answering the phone. She stopped explaining why. She started walking every morning before sunrise, talking only to the sky. I thought I was alone, she told me. But it turns out, I was finally with someone who never left myself. Sagittarius, you don't need to raise your voice anymore. You don't need to keep proving your worth. What is true does not need defense. What is sacred does not argue with what is false. It simply outshines it. The people who hurt you may face storms of their own. You may hear whispers of their struggles. But this is not your cue to gloat. This is your moment to rise with dignity. Because divine justice is not about punishment. It's about alignment. And in this alignment, everything that once drained you is falling away. Not because it's wrong, but because it's no longer yours. So pause now just for a breath. Place your hand over your heart. Listen to the silence. Can you hear how much lighter it feels? Write this if your soul stirs with truth. I do not seek earthly justice. I trust in divine arrangement. What I lost was never mine. What is mine will never require suffering to stay. Because you, Sagittarius, have nothing left to prove. You have become the light. And in this final chapter, you will no longer be protected by the divine because you are in danger. You will be walked with because you are ready. Conclusion: you were not cast aside. You were chosen to rise. Sagittarius, if you followed this far, then your soul already knows. This was never about loss. It was about return. You are not the one who was left behind. You are the one who outgrew the old room. You are not the one who failed. You are the one who endured long enough for the truth to find you again. Every gate you walked through in this journey was not a trial. It was a ceremony. A gentle yet powerful awakening of what you always carried inside. The fire that never dies. From the silence of your pain rose the call of your own spirit. From the unraveling of old identities emerged the deeper knowing. I was never broken. I was only buried. And now you rise, not to explain, not to prove, but to embody. To embody a light that asks for no permission because it is the permission. To claim peace not as a reward for endurance, but as your birthright. You were chosen not because you are better, but because you were ready. Ready to remember. Ready to stop carrying what was never yours. Ready to stop apologizing for what your soul already knows. You have walked through purification, through separation, through awakening. And now you stand in restoration. So let the world wonder where your fire came from. Let them ask how you became this peaceful, this free, this clear. You don't need to answer. You are the answer. As Sophia, I tell you this not as prophecy but as remembrance. Sagittarius, your journey has not ended. It has just begun. But this time you walk it differently. This time you don't beg to be chosen. You choose yourself. Let this be your vow as you close this sacred circle. I no longer live to endure. I live to be light. I no longer carry what does not nourish me. I rise not to escape, but to return home to myself. If this journey touched something within you, allow that light to ripple outward. Like, share, subscribe. Not for me, but so this message may find another soul standing on the same threshold you once stood on. Because you never know, your voice might be the very confirmation someone has been praying for. May your path be clear, your heart soft, and your light unstoppable. You are the guardian now. You are the flame. You are home.